welcome back to the Digital Ledger Podcast. I'm DJ, here with Aaron, always a step ahead, sometimes two. Today we're getting into what might be the largest single refund event in US trade history. $166 billion in tariffs flowing back to American companies. And honestly, this doesn't get talked about enough. So here's what we're looking at. The Supreme Court ruled that Section 301 tariffs on Chinese imports were unconstitutional, and now an estimated $166 billion to $175 billion in tariffs, plus interest, is legally owed back to companies. On paper, it looks like a massive windfall. But here's the thing. While the money's guaranteed by law, actually getting it back is going to be incredibly difficult.
That's the critical part most executives are missing, DJ. This isn't the government just cutting checks. It's an active recovery process, and it's going to expose exactly how well your organization tracks supply chain data. If your historical import records, tariff classifications, and payment documentation aren't pristine, you're going to hit a wall fast. So the move here is to treat this as an operational stress test, not a passive refund event.
Right, and what makes this especially challenging is that the entire burden sits with the companies. US Customs and Border Protection isn't proactively sending this money out. Instead, it's on the importer of record or an authorized customs broker to file what's called a CAPE declaration through the ACE system. That's the automated commercial environment. If you don't file, you don't get paid.
And that ACE system is not forgiving. It uses a strict two-step validation process. If your entry numbers are formatted incorrectly, if the entity filing isn't officially listed as the importer of record, or if there's corrupted data anywhere in the submission, the system rejects the entire declaration. There's zero margin for error here. You can't be mostly accurate and expect to see that cash flow anytime soon.
Before we continue with the episode, we want to be transparent with our audience, and that is that AI helps support research and shape parts of this episode. But all fact-checking, analysis, and final decisions come from us as humans. We're blending the best of both worlds. Alright, now continuing with our episode. So let's be clear about what that actually means in practice. CBP has been explicit. They will not use their historical import data to correct filer errors. If your declaration fails validation, you just get a rejection notice, and you start from scratch. No hand-holding, no corrections. For finance leaders, that means an internal audit of your historical import data isn't an option anymore. It's the only way to ensure your filing gets accepted.
Exactly. And this is where the timeline risk becomes really real. Clean filings that pass validation on the first try, you're looking at a 45-day payout window. But if your data has even a single error, you could be pushed into phase 2 or phase 3 of the recovery process, which could take 6 months or longer. So if you're a CFO listening right now, take your historical import records and ask yourself, do we have absolute certainty that every entry number, every IOR designation, and every payment record is audit ready? Because that's the standard you're up against.
And here's where this gets even more complicated. Legally, only the entity designated as the importer of record can claim these refunds. But in many cases, the actual cost of those tariffs was passed down the supply chain, often all the way to the end consumer. So you end up with this fascinating disconnect. The importer of record gets the refund, but there's no legal requirement to pass that money back to whoever ultimately paid the cost.
And that's creating real ethical and strategic questions. Economists largely agree that tariffs get built into pricing. So while a company may have technically paid the tariff to the government, the customer often bore that cost at the register. Now we're already seeing class action lawsuits. Costco, for example, is facing pressure from consumers seeking their share of these refunds. So the question finance leaders need to answer is, when this money hits the balance sheet, is it for increasing profit margins, or should it be redistributed?
What's interesting is how companies are responding. FedEx has taken a very clear ethical stance, publicly stating they'll return refunds to customers where they acted as the importer of record and passed duties on. Then you have others facing litigation. So this isn't just a legal question, it's a reputational one.
Absolutely. And finance leaders need to be proactive here, not reactive. Ask yourself, how do we want to be perceived by our partners and customers? Do we absorb this as a one-time gain, or do we use it to fortify relationships and mitigate potential legal exposure? My recommendation, do an internal assessment now of where these costs were ultimately born and decide on a clear policy before the cash lands and the questions get louder. It's about preserving trust as much as preserving capital.
Okay, so let's shift to how finance actually accounts for this. Because even if you recover the money, you can't just book it as a gain immediately, right?
No, you can't. Under GAAP, specifically ASC 450, these potential refunds are classified as gain contingencies. What that means is you cannot recognize this economic benefit in your financial statements until it's realized or virtually certain. You can't record a receivable or reduce your inventory's carrying value until eligibility is legally confirmed, the amount is determinable, and collection is probable without material legal or administrative hurdles.
So anticipating it isn't enough. You need official confirmation and certainty before it impacts your books. And if you prematurely record something that isn't virtually certain, you're setting yourself up for some serious downstream issues, particularly with inventory valuation or M&A activity.
Exactly. If you prematurely reduce your landed cost or COGS based on an unconfirmed refund, you're artificially inflating your gross margin and EBITDA. That can lead to skewed profitability tracking and even overspending if you use those metrics to set targets. And for M&A, this is a huge due diligence flag. Buy-side teams must explicitly investigate IEEPA refund rights, and buy-sell agreements need to define who retains these rights and how they're handled post-closing. So if you're looking at any M&A transaction right now, add this to your due diligence checklist. Have we clearly defined who retains the right to these historical refunds, and how will post-closing adjustments account for their interest-bearing nature?
Here's the real issue, though. Even as companies are scrambling to recover this $166 billion, there's a new 10% global tariff under Section 122 that just got imposed. So you've got importers putting in immense effort to get back a one-time refund while simultaneously facing a permanent structural increase in their cost of goods sold. It's a paradox.
And this is why it's so critical for finance leaders to not view this refund as found money that just disappears into increased tax expenses. This isn't a cash infusion to boost the bottom line for a quarter. It's an opportunity to build resilience. The strategic CFO won't let this capital get absorbed and vanish. Instead, they'll see it as a chance to future-proof the company.
So what does that look like in practice? If you're sitting on this refund, what's the proactive move?
Treat this capital as a strategic reserve. Use it to fund supply chain diversification, exploring nearshoring or friendshoring opportunities, investing in automation to reduce overall production costs, or building operational flexibility to navigate future trade policy shifts. Essentially, you're using funds recovered from what was deemed an unconstitutional act to fortify your operations against the next wave of uncertainty. That's how you turn a windfall into sustainable competitive advantage.
So as we start to wind us down, the core message here is really clear. This entire program is a test of data integrity, strategic financial decision-making, and how you balance short-term gains with long-term resilience.
It really is, DJ, and I think that reframe from windfall to strategic opportunity is the takeaway finance leaders need to carry forward. Really glad we got into this one.
All right, I think that's a good place for us to start wrapping this up. Really appreciate the conversation. And to everyone listening, thank you for taking the time to be with us and spend part of your day here. We genuinely appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time.